a little bit of a technical glitch here. Where no, Matthew.
Oh, do you want me to sit there?
Okay, so we've reconvened and we're now at what is a combined amendment, because Councillor Lee put up 2 amendments and he can only put up 1, so we've combined them. So
that's the whole point.
I want to have their time to read them.
Is Graham Street worth to us?
And we'll just ask if Councillor Lee wants to,
thank you.
to speak to them.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. The arguments are set out in the amendment, and essentially it would make a lot more sense, given the sensitivity and the strategic importance of the land in question, that a development strategy and a design strategy be completed for this before it is sold, and also in terms of retaining or maximising the value to the council and the ratepayers from the significant investment in the City Rail Link, that the property be retained until the completion of the City Rail Link, to ensure that the profit and the betterment comes back to the council, to the people of Auckland. So that's the first part of the amendment. And the second one relates to Graham Street. And it's just a pity that this part of the meeting isn't confidential, because I'm going to be very limited in what I say about Graham Street. But there's a significant and confidential use of Graham Street that will be very difficult to replace. And without going too much further into that, I'm concerned about process. I'm concerned about local board consultation box ticked. And the local board were never ever told about the strategic use of that building. Never told about it. It all came out at a long-term plan have your say hearing from a member of the public, and the local board members were quite surprised, indeed shocked. So in terms of decision making, the Local Government Act is quite clear about the criteria for good decision making, and I would say that some of the decisions made today are not in the spirit of the Act, but in selling Graham Street without having members of this council having all the information, I think is not compliant with the decision-making processes set out in the Act. So what I'm asking here is just to defer the sale of both of those properties until we get all the information and we are sure that this is a financially sustainable decision. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay,
Thank you.
Just ask for further explanation just of...
Yeah, look, thanks very much through the Chair. So when we did talk earlier about 4 to 10 Merrill Drive, it's important to recognise that the valuation advice we've received is that the uplift associated with the CRL, pretty much the market understands that and does reflect that. And so if we choose to enable the disposal process to begin, that has certainly been taken into consideration. But the important thing that I would add to that as well is, as it relates to that development, it's important that the development is done aligned with the CRL and not after. And that's important both in terms of timing that that development can then be framed up with the CRL in mind, and they can both mutually inform themselves, and foundations can be achieved that support the development. But also we already haven't started engaging on that, on what a development framework looks like. And I've mentioned this before in terms of the public realm with our Auckland Design Office, with RFA in terms of how it integrates in with Aotea Square, and in terms of other parties, the local board as well, and their input into that. And so that will be ongoing. So the decision around 4 to 10 Merrill Drive is the right time to make that decision to enable us to do the development in a joined up way onto that with CRL. Otherwise, the outcome, I would contend, would be poor for Auckland. It'll end up a car park for 10 years as a linear program, and it needs to be done in a joined up way. And importantly, from a value perspective, you can never second guess where values will go. We know now that the market's strong, and we know now that the market recognises the value uplift.
Point of order, Mr Chairman. I
I'm
don't
going to
propose
allow
to
you-
debate
I'm going to
debate this
overrule-
officer. They shouldn't be debating us at this stage
information.
of the meeting.
I think it's
It's
I
really
am
not
ruling-
appropriate.
I am ruling this as information, but I was going to allow
Not
you.
information, it's polemics.
I was going
Oh,
to
it's
allow you
nonsense.
to
Not a
ask a
lot of
further question
nonsense.
if you wanted, so please keep going.
Yeah, so that the value of that site is already recognised because the CRL is signposted. And I'll stick to my guns on this. You won't get more value out of that site. You might get some more, but you can't guarantee
It's your
it.
opinion. I don't care about your opinion.
hey.
You're here to
Point
give
of
technical
order. Sorry,
advice.
point of order, Mr Chair.
Yep.
My point of order is the inability of councillors to hear the advice that we're getting from our staff because of the constant interruptions that are unhelpful and inappropriate.
It's a
Can we
point of
please-
order.
That is a point of order. I'd like to actually be able to hear the answers.
So that is the valuation advice we've received is in line with what I'm saying. So we're relying on that advice, and so it's not my opinion, it's the advice of commercial valuations related to the site. So that's in relation, so delaying that decision will only delay the right outcome for that site and the ability to develop that site in a contiguous way with the CRL development. And that's very important to make that decision now so that it can be done in the right way in consultation with those people who are doing the works at that site.
Thank
Need
you.
to have outsourced debating as
Any
well.
Yeah.
comment on,
Hey.
any comment on number 2?
Look,
You
the
don't need
comment
to
on-
comment,
on-
you don't need to comment if you don't want to.
Look, the comment on number 2, I think that's taken care of in Resolution B, is that we will consult widely on 35 Graham Street. And everything that you may be referring to, and I don't know specifically what, has been part of conversations that are happening with council and being freely discussed with the local board.
Right, I have Councillor Hills, Councillor Wayne Walker and Councillor Filipiano.
No, it was more of that the questions have been answered because the presentation before was very clear about the need to build it all and work it in together and get the footings right. So it was just you answered the questions.
Councillor Walker.
My question's been answered.
So we're down to Councillor Filipiano.
Just in relation to B, or the, what is it, IJ, is it 2? 35 Graham Street. Staff, how many staff are currently there?
750, I believe.
Have they or their managers been spoken to in regards to the condition of 35 Graham Street? And if they have, can you tell us what the comments have been around 35 Graham Street, please?
Yes, through the chair. Staff there are generally pretty unhappy with the workspace there and the condition of it. Again, the engagement survey results for 35 Graham Street overall show a poor result there in terms of their engagement overall. And again, the workspace area is highlighted a lot. I do go out with Stephen Town when he does his roadshows, and it's a frequent comment that we get about the state of the building and the fact that we really need to look at the building or relocate the staff. And we've had those conversations with the managers, and they're very keen for us to move the staff as soon as we can.
Through you, Chair, supplementary, these comments, how long have you or the CEO been receiving these comments around their workspace?
Definitely about a year. It seems to have, one of the challenges with Graham Street is for the renewals on that site have been deferred a couple of times. And the staff have complained each time that they're deferred. They understand when money is spent elsewhere on community-facing facilities, but definitely over the last year to 18 months, it's got more strident in terms of needing to address those issues on the site.
And just one last question. Am I correct in saying that if the sale of this particular property, that the conditions that our staff are working in will get worse?
Absolutely. Unless we can obtain the money to address the issues at that site, then yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I just want to ask you if you can address our health and safety responsibilities as PCBU if we don't address these issues in terms of physical and mental wellbeing of our staff.
Yep. So currently our buildings have warranted fitnesses, but that's absolute minimum standards. What we are finding in some of our locations that are impacted by poor air conditioning, and we have had to close a few buildings, admin building in Henderson closed recently because of air conditioning failure and everyone was sent home. But other things relate to conditions of dampness and other factors. So in time, over the next 10-year period, we expect there to be situations in our buildings where we might have to close those buildings for periods and deal with things reactively.
And so in terms of the law, what would we be sanctioned? Would we be taken to court? What fined? What's the... If there were complaints or it was found by WorkSafe that was caused some sort of physical or mental injury?
Just before Steve answers on that one, we're considered to be a large, well-funded organisation, so there can be no excuse when it comes to health and safety.
Yep.
And I'll just make sure that you understand that.
I understand that under the law, you cannot say you do not have enough money, you have to fix it and you have to find the money from somewhere.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're right.
Right, I think the last speaker is Councillor Casey.
It's a question to Rod. Rod, I'm a wee bit confused about your answer to Councillor Lee and the comment that's in our report with regard to the local board. The local board asked you to investigate the long-term benefits and costs of leasing land and the net present value of selling land now or after the City Rail link. And your response to that is, the corporate property team will investigate as part of the development strategy the long-term benefits and costs of leasing land and the net present value of selling the land now or after the City Rail link is completed. But you've just given us an assurance that you already know the answer to that. So have you done the work? Have you done that work already to get to there?
Through the Chair, apologies if the wording's unclear. What we're trying to talk about there was the leasing of the land and the net present value and the sale of the land again and the net present value of that. We have undertaken.
Or
sure.
After.
We have undertaken some initial calculations that we believe proves that the strategy we've got at the moment is the correct strategy. But what we wanted to do, particularly as it relates to leasing, was just understand that a bit more clearly. As it relates to leasing, we're unclear that there's a market for leasing of the land, and historically there's been some negative views on leasing land, particularly of something of that size and scale. So that's what we didn't want to sort of try and...
Yeah, I think and there might be some confusion, but we'd stack both things up and get commercial advice as leasehold land versus freehold, as selling the land or selling it as a long-term lease development. they would look at both options if
Both
approval
options
was.
and before and after? Because that's what you say you're going to do.
So both options as it relates to a strategy to divest the land. So divest the land in terms of like a long-term, a development in terms of a long-term lease. How would that stack up in the market versus development in the land as part of selling the land? So we'd stack both those up, get commercial advice of those, and provide that information back to the local board is what we're asked to do, and we would comply with that.
Thanks. Mr Chairman, I'm not satisfied with the answer yet. Just give me one more minute. When the local board asks you to look at the time to sell, you say it's part of your investigation. Are you saying that it's not?
My understanding of the local board feedback was more around leasing, not of the timing of the sale.
Leasehold.
So, yeah, so they had a view, I think from memory, it was a Singaporean example where the Singapore government leased land as opposed to selling it. And so what they talked about was investigating a leasehold option for the land. So instead of selling it, was to a long-term lease, which I presume would be like a 50-year or 100-year lease, instead of selling it. That was my recollection of the local board feedback.
Okay, so this is you've misinterpreted then the local board, what the local board asked for in your report. I'm on page 30.
No, I don't believe so. I believe that was the intention, was that could you please, if this is approved, investigate two options. One is a development where you sell the land, and another is a development where you sell the rights to occupy the land for a long-term lease.
I understand that, Rod, but that's not what it says here, so it's been misinterpreted. I'm on page 30 and number 4.
Page 30, number 4.
So it seems that you've done half of what they say, but not the other half, which is the timing of the sale or lease. And if you're saying
Oh, okay, yeah, look, that may be misworded from me.
Okay, from your point of view.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. I'm going to put this. No doubt there'll be a call for a division. Or is it no?
Division, please.
Division. Okay. We will start with division. And so whether you support this or not.
Councillor Clow,
No.
Councillor Bartley,
No.
Councillor Casey,
Yes.
Councillor Cashmore,
No.
Councillor Cooper,
No.
Councillor Darby,
Against.
Councillor Filipina,
Against.
Councillor Fletcher, for. Mayor Goff,
No.
Councillor Hills,
No.
Councillor Holtz,
No.
Councillor Lee,
Aye.
Councillor Newman,
For.
Councillor Simpson, no. Member Taipari,
No.
Councillor Walker,
Yes.
Councillor Watson,
Yes.
We just need to get Cooper. Councillor Cooper?
Cooper was
I already said
yes, no,
no.
Against.
yes, she was
Yeah.
against.
Oh no, Councillor Cooper was against.
Yeah, I was against. I thought I said that quite loud. Oh well.
Cashmore was against. Moving the screen.
Okay, right. Well, that is lost, 6 to 11, so we will now go back to the substantive recommendations, which include a new B that has been added.
By division.
Chair, can I just point of order on something? Chair, I just wondered if you could reflect, it doesn't have to be now, but inviting the officer's analysis of an amendment once the amendment has been introduced for debate, and then offering the officers just carte blanche, well, would you like to comment on that? I don't think is helpful to the officers because it appears to be calling them into the debate. And I think if there was a specific question that required a response, that's fine. But I would suggest that the information that the officers provided was provided with some comprehensive detail earlier today and at the previous workshop presentations about this. If people are not confident about rebutting Councillor Lee and Councillor Casey in debate, well, they just have to, frankly, in my view, is to stay silent and vote against it. And if they want to take a call, they can speak against it. But I think inviting officers to just participate as part of a, well, would you like to comment on that, brings the officers into debate and puts them in a very difficult situation. So can I ask that you just ponder that before we arrive at that situation in the future?
Yep.
Thank you.
Right. Anyone wish to speak to this?
Chair, can I just give you something else to ponder?
Yep.
My understanding is that you asked for clarification because I was looking for clarification around the statement that was made. So please ponder that because I think it's okay for the staff to come back with clarification around what I would have asked anyway, as I did before we adjourned. But my understanding was, Chair, you asked to comment on and clarify and talk about what was suggested in the amendment. So can you please ponder that as well? Thank you.
Overload the chairman's
I
capacity.
totally agree with you,
Well,
and
he's
I was
pondering
going
twice, that's
going to say that, but I thought, why inflame the situation, and I decided just to
Oh, I didn't want to flame
just
it,
to
sorry.
ponder.
You little fire starter, you.
Oh, I'll be pondering.
But don't be ponderous.
Being a bit ponderous.
Now, sorry, are these people wanting to speak? Councillor Lee.
Yes, Mr Chairman. We've heard today that management have made the argument to sell these assets based on primary reasons of beneficence, looking after the staff, better accommodate our people, and also better service to our customers. Interesting way to separate these two groups of people. Customers are obviously, by customers it is meant the general public, the citizens and ratepayers of Auckland. With all due respect, Mr Chairman, I have some doubts about that argument, and it could mean then that management is taking an overly commercial approach. The frequent use of the word customers would suggest a commercial-minded approach, hard-nosed, rigorous, driven by maximising the return to the council and so on. But I also doubt that theory as well. I think anyone can sell public property in Auckland, and what I'm concerned about, why I doubt the commercial theory as well, is that quite often to make the case in this room, management resorts to denigrating the property they want to sell. So unlike most vendors who emphasise the positive, we hear about the negative aspects, and this happened with the Civic Administration building, and we're hearing just about every building that's up for sale 7 years into the super city is badly maintained. Badly maintained. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but either way, it's not good. If it is badly maintained, that reflects on the people who are meant to maintain them, to maintain their value. If they're not maintained, if that is not strictly true, then talking like that just strips value out of the property you're trying to sell. So I think we have to dismiss the hard-nosed commercial approach. It's, you know, using jargon like customers, customers, customers all the time sounds commercial, but in reality, no. So I suspect that really the answer lies in section 22 of the report, which is to plug a $117 million hole in the LTP is the principal reason for selling these properties. What I'm concerned about is the way we are now dealing with local boards. Now, we had the local boards come in here and make very well considered arguments, not to abandon the sale completely, but to defer the sale until certain conditions, sensible conditions, had been met. When the local boards make these sorts of cases, they more often than not have the overwhelming majority of their communities behind them. And I was interested to hear management take some time to criticise a Rodney Times poll, but however, one poll we do know, because it was carried out by the council itself a few years ago, and it has been done again, but the return isn't that much better, and that is how many Aucklanders are satisfied with the performance of the council, and how many are confident that the council makes sound decisions or the right decisions. And the original result was only 15% of Aucklanders are satisfied with the council, and only 17% of Aucklanders think the council makes the right decision. Now, it's been improved a little bit, about 2% or something, but obviously nothing to write home about, otherwise we would have heard a lot more about this big turnaround, but there hasn't been a turnaround at all. So I believe, rather than criticising the Rodney Times poll, I think we should reflect on our own polling and the level of confidence the public has in us. If we are overriding, dismissing, trampling on, if you like, the decisions and the advice of the local boards, that's not going to enhance the reputation of this council with the general public. And I think this is a unitary, as this is a unitary authority with regional responsibilities and local responsibilities, power has concentrated in the centre, and that means we have to do more, if anything, to keep the support and confidence of local districts. And today we heard from Papakura Local Board, and that is the successor of the Papakura District Council, which had for many, many decades its own political culture, its own community of interest. And if I recall, in the lead up to the Super City, the public and the councillors were demonstrating, asking for passports when people came into Papakura District. That shows you the level of scepticism at the start of the Super City, and I have to say I'm not sure whether that's going to be improved by the decisions that we're being asked to make today. Similarly with
You're
Rodney.
at 6 minutes, Councillor.
Already half of Rodney wants to break away.
A bit extension.
And I'll wrapping up right now, Mr. Chairman. That's another area with its own community of interest, and a civic centre that's important to the local people, whatever ward they ever ended up in. They know where they live, and they know what is Rodney, and where their community is. So I think, again, by taking these decisions in such a high-handed way and refusing to defer them, the Auckland Council is actually shooting itself in the foot and undermining its credibility with the general public. And no one can be blamed for this except ourselves. I urge my colleagues here to vote this set of recommendations down. Can I just add something, just one more piece about Graham Street?
Councillor Lee, I actually let you speak inappropriately because you'd moved an amendment, so can you please wrap up?
I'm wrapping up now. Graham Street is where the Auckland Council meets the real world in terms of the business world. Auckland's main industry, if you like, is building and selling property, property development, and that is Graham Street is extremely well used by the industry, and not just by the industry, but also many householders use that. I've worked in Graham Street.
Councillor Lee.
I worked in
Councillor
Graham Street
Lee,
for 5
I'm going to
years.
shut you
It's
down,
fit
I'm
for
afraid.
purpose.
Point of
And I'll
order,
leave it
we're
at
well
that.
over time,
Yes,
Mr.
it's
Chair.
8 minutes, he got an extension, but that's it.
There was no vote on the extension.
Look, I'm trying to get
I know,
through
sorry.
this in a good way
You're
without,
doing good.
Doing
without,
okay, Ross.
without a dust-up.
I'm with you.
So we have we've had Councillor Lee against, we've got Councillor Simpson. I was actually going to wrap up the debate as a mover, but subsequently we've got Councillor Cashmore, Mayor Goff, Councillor Wayne Walker and Councillor Hulse.
I'll speak again. Yes, that's me.
So who's going?
All right, Councillor Simpson.
Oh, sorry.
Point of order, Mr Chairman.
I haven't started yet.
Oh, no, it wasn't about you.
Oh, good.
It was just that I was wondering if we could relieve the staff of having to sit before us, since we're now in political debate.
Well, it's always quite educational.
They've got a front row stall, they're probably
We're very happy to go.
I think they want to see it through to conclusion.
No, I think we'll leave it as it is. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. My comments are around a positive vote of support for these recommendations. For me, it's about working better for Aucklanders, the communities, residents and ratepayers that operate and are part of Auckland. It's also about working better for council, both our staff and our elected members. So let's have a look at working better for Auckland, at the communities and residents and ratepayers. Look, 4 generations before me, we only had one building and it was right here. And look at us now, we're a huge region and we're only going to get bigger and more intensified. We have 13 wards now, and less than half of those wards have the ability for the people who live in them to have face-to-face access to regulatory services, one of the most key driving parts of council that people use. If this goes forward, that will be 100%, not 90-something, not 80-something, but 100% will have face-to-face access to regulatory services. That can only be better for Auckland. If you look at better working conditions for the staff, we know that we have buildings that we haven't maintained well, that living conditions, working conditions within those aren't good. We've got a higher level of health and safety that we have to abide by. And this will actually give council staff a better work environment. It will give elected members and local boards a better work environment. Now for us, we're all focused centrally, really. But for local boards, they need not just their local board spaces, but they need the customer services with that. In Ōrākei, there is no local board space. We don't have one. They're operating at the moment out of the top of Albert Street because there isn't one. So this will actually deliver one for them. In fact, it won't just deliver one for them. It will have 4 new and 17 refurbished. It will have 7 new customer service centres and 13 refurbished. I mean, this is a lot of extra space for council staff and elected members. Not just that, but it's pretty much self-funding. You haven't come here with an ask for some extra money. You're basically saying if we work better, we'll actually be able to, it'll be a self-funding operational delivery. It's delivering value for money. I can't understand why we have 40% of space that we don't need, that people don't want to get rid of and refinance that better into more spaces that people can use better. So for me, it's a bit of a no-brainer, actually. I think, finally, my comment will be, it must be challenging for some people to look at a different model. This is a model that actually isn't about today. It's about a model that will work for tomorrow. And we struggle quite often in council to plan accurately for tomorrow. But you've given us international examples where the hub-spoke sort of model is something that internationally countries have used, and it's a lesson that we should look and learn from. And I think that the forward-thinking planning for tomorrow on a little you know, a little spread everywhere is much better than one big thing that people have got to come a long way towards. We'll have 96% of people in our region living within 10 k's of one of our offices, and I think that's really good. So I commend you, and I thank you for the extra work that you put in. I know it's been a challenge, and I know that you've spent a lot of time discussing this with a lot of people. So thank you very much, and Mr. Chairman, I support the recommendations.
Right, well, I'm going to go to Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. I've said most of what I want to say, but I'll just make a few quick points. I'm disappointed that local boards have not been listened to again, and this is a familiar pattern that is occurring now over what for many local boards are very, very important strategic issues for them that go to their ability to function. I'm very disappointed that as much and all as we've got a corporate office strategy, the strategy that should be running alongside that, which I would suggest is complementary, which is a civic strategy, is not happening. And I think those two things are complementary. There's a deal being cut out west to satisfy that. There are other deals being cut.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
He
yes.
was instructed.
I don't know what, can we just,
No, I hear what you're saying.
Well,
Wayne, just,
you know,
please, just rephrase it.
Henderson's being looked after. Various parts of the region are being looked after, primarily to cater for a civic function. That's part of it. But that principle, if it is a principle, is not being applied across the region, and that's very disappointing. And it's disappointing at a time when, in many respects, forms of civic participation are going down and need to be lifted. And that function often needs to exist on a face-to-face basis, and that's what these locations have served. So increasingly we're moving to a society, and that's reflected in this council, where face-to-face interaction is becoming more and more difficult, and our facilities are being increasingly commercialised, and land's being sold off. That's what's happening. So I'm disappointed. I can only say that in later years history we'll probably reflect on these decisions and say, well, why did they do that? Why did they get rid of
maybe
that
we don't.
wonderful location at Rodney that was catering for half of the area, near enough, of the Auckland region, about 46%, I think. So, yeah.
Okay, right. Well, I'm going to now ask for Councillor Cashmore.
Well, thank you. Mr Chair, I'll be very, very brief. A constituent of mine in Beachlands wants to go and get a resource consent. A year ago they had to drive to Manukau. Now, under this new proposal, and what's actually been already rolled out in the south, is one phone call and they will have an appointment with an advisor from Parks, an advisor from Planning in Beachlands, maybe in the local library, meeting 3 or 4 different clients from Beachlands. It's an enhanced service. This strategy is not about looking at the past. It's about looking what's fit for the future. It's about the health and safety of our staff, and actually the most important thing is providing a better service to those Aucklanders who use our services, our clients, for want of a better word. And we heard about what has been the success of the council, 17% approval rating. Well, it's actually currently just under 25%, so it's 7 or 8% improvement. That's about a 45% improvement. That's pretty good, and we're moving in the right direction.
80% not.
The other challenges we had, and we heard from local boards this morning, and I completely understand where they're coming from. What Andy Baker spoke about was exactly the issues some of them are feeling. And when I spoke to him at lunchtime with the recommendations we have in the new B, he said, we're fine. That's what we want to hear. That's what we want. We want to be able to work with the staff, with the corporate polity, with Panuku teams to deliver the outcomes for Pukekohe. And I'd suggest the same would apply to Albany, Papakura and the other areas. And my last comment is, this proposal actually is going to give a home for local governance in Rodney, in their area, and they haven't had that before. So that will be a good outcome for the Rodney Local Board and the councillors going forward in that area. So, Mr Chairman, my vote is a big yes.
Rightio. I'm going to now call for Councillor Newman to speak, maybe against, maybe for, I'm not sure.
Yeah, in the report this month compared to last, there are two changes. One's at Henderson Valley Road and one's at Coles Crescent. All I can say is that I didn't seek an intervention on Coles Crescent prior, but there's a recommendation that the position at Coles Crescent is going to change. So what I can say is that I do want to acknowledge the changes in relation to Coles Crescent to date. The residual land subdivided for the purpose of protecting the reserve and containing the historic Centennial House and the time capsule and playground, I think is a very constructive move, and I do acknowledge the staff for that. I don't agree with the timing, but that's been addressed with the debate prior. What I do say, Chair, is that I reflect on the scale of this. We've got 7 corporate property sales which have been flagged, not months in advance, but years in advance of them going to the market. And in so doing, the officers have declared that they have to move because these properties are crystallising liabilities, and that's impacting on the cost of the maintenance of that property portfolio. That's an argument, but to make that as a public argument prior to going out to the market, I think is very, very unusual. It's a bit like, I liken it to, it's like selling the family home because we anticipate moving into a rental unit, the size and location of which isn't yet known. And that's what we're voting for. I read Bob Day's property report this morning, Chair, a combined valuation of 190 million. The information's already out in the market. I was walking down the road at lunchtime, bumped into one of Auckland's leading commercial leasing lawyers, and he was laughing because he said that we have announced in the report that we are putting 52,000 square metres of commercial floor space out to the market in advance of it actually happening. And that's the concern that I have about the strategy around this. The final thing that I will say, Chair, is that I can't reflect on polls at Colmar Brunton or stuff or local suburban newspapers. All I can do is reflect on the feedback that I'm getting when I'm door knocking. And I have to say it's quite slow in my ward because my constituents are being very embracing and sustaining, and it's lovely the feedback that I get, but it's quite slow because they want to talk to me. But what those constituents do say is that they tend to decouple their feedback, where they give me quite a positive run, but they don't give such a positive run for the council overall. And I worry about how this will be perceived by the community in Papakura, how it will be perceived in Pukekohe, how it will be perceived in Orewa. This is going to be contentious. A friend of mine is standing in the Northcote by-election. He's going to win that because he is, I think quite cynically, basing his campaign on a direct critique of this council and knocking on doors in Stanley Road in Glenfield over the weekend. It's working. So, Chair, I'm not going to support this, not because I don't think there is value in some of the work here. I think there's a lot of value in the work, but the strategy of announcing this 52,000 square metres at this point, years in advance, without having completed some of the work around the master planning that needs to go into some of these locations is unwise. And I think that there is a requirement to engage our community. We haven't engaged because we don't perceive that there is a reduction in service. There is certainly going to be a change in service. That is something that we ought to have reflected on with our community, but we're not going to. And we will wear the odium for that.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Look, can I first congratulate the staff for the job that they've done, Rod, Marion, Sharon, Steve and Kevin. You've put hours into consultation. You've talked to every governing body member or made yourself available to talk to them. You've been around the boards. This discussion has gone on for months and months, and that's appropriate. It's a big decision. but sooner or later, we've got to make a decision, not keep deferring a decision. And I'm happy to go into anybody's ward and justify the option that is being proposed here. Because what do I hear around the city? I hear this continuously, and I guarantee every one of you do as well. We had the amalgamation. Please show us where the savings are that you promised as a result of the amalgamation. And if I go to them and I say, well, actually, we've got 45% too much floor space for our corporate activities, but we're going to hold on to it, and we're going to knock you 8% rise in the rates to sustain floor space that we don't need, what do you think they're going to say back to us? Any councillor that wants to debate that with me in front of any part of their ward, I'm happy to do that, because I know that our constituents will come down with a common sense decision. If you've got 45% too much space and you've got 10 years of deferred maintenance and it's going to cost $210 million and we don't have 117 million of those, do you keep it? Do we keep Orewa when it's got a huge amount of it not being leased out at the moment because there's not demand for it? Because it's not the right place for the Rodney Local Board to be in? Because the Local Government Commissioner said Rodney Local Board wants a home in its own patch, and it should have it, so there'll be more empty space in Orewa. Do we keep it for sentimental sake? And is it the best thing that we can do to spend $117 million of our money sustaining space we don't need? It's a nonsense. It's a bloody nonsense, and everybody knows it. Look, I don't mind the local boards coming here and advocating for their patch. That's their job. But each one of us are regional councillors. We're making a decision that is good for the city as a whole. And should we be preferring a couple of places in the city to maintain building space we don't need when we've got so many other things to do? I'd rather be putting that money into the homeless than sustaining empty space that badly needs maintenance. There's 3 criteria that we need to make a decision on. First, is this good for the people we represent? In other words, does it improve access by our constituents to the services we provide locally? And the answer there, set out in statistics for you, obviously. There's a much greater level of access of our people, and the new places will be in better situations for them, and they'll be more customer friendly. And don't we want to be that? Secondly, go down to Graham Street. I was down there the other day. I talked to the staff. They're doing a bloody good job catching up on a backlog of resource consent. But look at the conditions they're working in. It's a disgrace that we as a council are requiring our staff to work in things in an area that's not fit for purpose. And I went down to the new service centre at Manukau. No wonder they've got 20% better productivity, because that's what it's set up to produce. So first, is it good for our constituents? Of course. Second, is it good for our staff? Absolutely. And third, is it good for our residents and ratepayers that instead of spending $117 million, that's just under 1% increase in rates for each of the 10 years, to keep empty space? No, that is absolutely a nonsense. The work does need to be done on these buildings. It's not up to standard. I've watched the debacle around the county's Manukau District Health Board. Do we really want to end up with that? Leaky buildings, poorly ventilated, poorly heated, cramped spaces. We don't want it. We have a solution that we can win without charging an extra dollar to the people that we represent. That's our obligation as governors. We need to do that. We must do that. Now, is it our decision or is it the local boards? Well, I've got to say, if the local boards owned this property and they were paying for its upkeep and they were paying for its upgrade, it might be their decision, but they're not. We are meeting that cost, and therefore we have to make the decision, and one that makes sense. And we have to apply the same standard right across our region. We can't go to one area, to Manukau, and say, Manukau, okay, they're being very good, they're passing across the surplus property, and they know that they'll get that back because it's all ring-fenced, it'll all go back into improved property, but we're not going to put the same requirement on the same standards, on the same rules to another area of Auckland. We've got to apply those rules right across the board and give the same treatment to everybody. So in summary, 3 things: better outcome for the people we serve, better access, better conditions, more customer friendly, better conditions for our staff. Let's lift our productivity, let's respect our staff, let's give them a 21st century office to work in. And thirdly, better for the people that we represent in terms of spending their money. We owe it to them to spend that money wisely, and that's what this option provides for.
Call for a division.
Even though we haven't had 3 consecutive speakers, I'm going to ask Councillor Hulse and Philippina, because I'm willing to surrender my right of reply to put this, because we've had 3 of each, but I'm asking those 2 people who are entitled to speak. Councillor Hulse?
And thank you, Mr Chair, that's very generous of you. I think the Mayor, between the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Simpson, they've hit the nail on the head, really. I just want to address a little bit of the feeling in the room. This has been a multi-layered conversation. There's an awful lot said, but there's a huge amount behind everything that's been said. And we are, you know, effectively, I think there is a little bit of blood on the floor every time we rekindle those amalgamation debates. And that is what this is. You know, there is still, we're still a little bit raw around these issues, and I think it comes up today. So I do understand the strength of feeling in the room. However, people talked about working with our local boards, working with our staff, and working through these processes. And that's exactly what we did out west. We worked with our local board in partnership. We worked with Te Kawerau Amaki, and we worked with this awesome bunch of staff that you see in front of us, and we actually reached an agreement on the way forward. My presumption was that that was exactly what everyone else was doing and how this would be treated. It's quite clear. I think the Deputy Mayor explained that as soon as he worked through today with Andy Baker and came up with the recommendation that he's come up with, the problem was sorted. I think it's a really good indication that when you have a chance to work on solutions, please grab them. That's actually what effective elected members do, and I think that's what we're seeing today. So I also just want to finish this by saying that you will remember that the issue around Henderson and Te Kawerau Amaki is the reason why the local board and Councillor Cooper and I were as involved as we were. This is tied up with the Rahui and the agreements around the Rahui, which you'll remember have been exceedingly complex and have taken hours and hours and hours and days of meetings to sort out. It's tied up with the the solution to the Te Hinga Marae, which again, thank you to Councillor Philippina, who's been absolutely staunch in helping work this through. The future of Henderson is dependent on that. It's also linked to our retention of the taonga at number 6 Henderson Valley Road, and the final settlement of how we actually do dispose of the remainder of the land once all these other issues are settled. So it is not a straightforward issue, and it's far more complex than any of the other issues we're dealing with. So we all struggle from time to time with our regional hats. That's just how this is. And I'd just like to acknowledge my colleagues who are finding this a difficult process, but I think we've got to exactly where we need to get to, and I will resoundingly support the recommendations. And thank you for steering us through, Mr Chair. It's been a very challenging day.
30 seconds. On our agenda, under number 22, CapEx constraints, and the third bullet point is part of the reason why I'm supporting it. It's got there, we will not be able to do this, A, B, C, all the way through. This allows us to do that. The other thing I just wanted to mention was a year that the Graham Street staff have been waiting for to get out of the crap that they're in now. It's been a year, and again, it allows us to do that. But lastly, I've got about 10 seconds left. Rod, you said in your presentation, Rod, you got fixed the way we are delivering customer service. And not only that, but the health and safety that we've spoken collectively around this table. That was the other reason why I will be supporting this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. will just speak incredibly briefly, which is just, for those who have missed the point, is that we've been hearing from local boards and a lot of councillors that we should be optimising things and they should be actually ring-fenced around for the area. And this is actually an extension of that policy where the executive leadership team have basically said, no, this should be ring-fenced to go back into where it came from effectively and improve service delivery and interaction with our clients and also to fit for purpose for staff. So that should be recognised that we have actually extended that policy, and I think it's really important to move forward. So my last words are going to be thank Rod and Steve especially, but also obviously Sharon and Marion, but Rod and Steve for going back to the drawing board and working it through and extending that 200 hours into 400 hours of discussions with local boards and other interested parties. But this is a big item, and I think we're going to deliver it, and I congratulate you guys for your contribution. So by division, we're going to put the amendments, the substantive motion.
Point of order before you do that, Mr Chairman. Can you take 5 separately?
Sorry?
Can you take 5 separately?
5.
What's 5?
Yep. Okay, do you want to take it separately or do you want to...
Vote against it.
Just record your vote, eh? That might be easier, so... That's all right. Right, by division.
Councillor Clow.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley.
4.
Councillor Casey.
Yes, but not 5.
Councillor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
Aye.
Councillor Darby.
4.
Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Mayor Goff.
Yes.
Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Holst.
Aye.
Councillor Lee.
No.
Councillor Newman.
No.
Councillor Simpson.
4.
Member Taipari.
4.
Councillor Walker.
No.
Councillor Watson.
No.
Right, that has been carried, so thank you, members. Right, well, I'll move the procedural motion to exclude the public. Oh, sorry, consideration of extraordinary...
What about
No,
10?
wait a minute.
10.
10 as well.
I'll move 10.
10, moved by off, second by Member Tybury. Any further information on 10?
How about we have a debate?
There's no call for a debate, so I'll
Is there
move
any-
that. All those in favour?
Mr Chairman, sorry, we've got no staff here, but were there any issues that needed to be addressed or?
Kevin,
I don't know, we just don't want to
Kevin,
sort of.
under item 10, are there any issues you would like to highlight?
Thank you. I just want to be clear because everyone on the side, I didn't, I voted for that. You voted for it.
And to
It's
put
all
that
right.
motion, all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Right, thanks against. The consideration of extraordinary items, there are none, so I will move, and it's seconded
I'll
by
second.
Member
Aye.
Tybury, that we go and exclude the public. And you've got a 2-minute break while we stretch your legs and we shut the doors and...